Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight: US urges countries for best offers on tariffs deal before deadline. And OECD cuts global economic growth amid trade war. That's coming up on AWANI International. Our first story for tonight: Washington has urged countries to submit their best offers on trade negotiations by Wednesday. Officials under the Trump administration are seeking to wrap up talks with multiple partners ahead of the July 8th tariff deadline. According to a draft letter to negotiating partners that was cited by Reuters, the U.S. is asking countries to list their best proposals in a number of key areas. This includes tariff and quota offers for purchase of U.S. industrial and agricultural products, as well as plans to remedy any non-tariff barriers. Other requested items include commitments on digital trade and economic security, along with country-specific commitments. It is unclear which countries have received the letter, but it was directed at those with active negotiations in place. So far, only one agreement has been reached with a major U.S. trading partner, the UK. Despite court challenges, the Trump administration plans to continue tariffs under other laws, urging talks to stay on track. Right, the global economy is expected to slow from 3.3% last year to 2.9% in both 2025 and 2026, driven by the anticipated fallout from recent tariffs introduced by U.S. President Donald Trump. In its latest report, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, warns that rising protectionism could further weaken growth, fuel inflation, disrupt supply chains, and rattle markets. In its previous report in March, the OECD had forecast growth of 3.1% for 2025 and 3.0% for 2026. Since then, Trump has launched a wave of tariffs that has rattled financial markets and fueled global economic uncertainty. The OECD also downgraded U.S. growth for 2025 from 2.2% to 1.6%. projecting a further slowdown to 1.5% in 2026. This marks a sizable cut, as the organization had previously expected the world's biggest economy to grow 2.2% this year and 1.6% next year. The agency warned that while tariffs may push some manufacturing back to the U.S., as the Trump administration claimed, they also risk squeezing consumer spending and deter business investment. As for China, the OECD expects the second biggest economy to grow 4.7% this year and 4.3% in 2026, largely unchanged from earlier forecasts. The impact of U.S. tariffs in China, it said, is likely to be cushioned by government subsidies and welfare transfers. We have more after the break. Don't go anywhere.
Yang paling hebat, aku. Kau nak sampai tempat aku? Teruskan bermimpi.
Hebat? Kau yakin? Tenagaku terbukti. Aku dah lebih jauh. Kau bukan macam aku. Pilihan kau, punca kejatuhan kau. Memang ada yang hebat, hingga munculnya yang terhebat.
Welcome back. Economic activity in the U.S. manufacturing sector continues to contract in May amid uncertainties surrounding President Donald Trump's tariff policies. This is evident from the Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index (PMI) standing at 48.5%, according to data released by the Institute for Supply Management.
This marked the third straight month of contraction, with May's reading dipping slightly below April's 48.7%. A reading under 50% signals a general contraction in the manufacturing sector. According to the ISM, government spending cuts or delays, along with tariffs, have caused serious disruptions to U.S. businesses. The conference board measure of CEO confidence, a barometer of the health of the U.S. economy from the perspective of chief executives, fell sharply to 34 in the second quarter of 2025, the largest quarter-on-quarter decline in almost 50 years. Latest data from the conference board also showed that 83% of business leaders are expecting a recession in the next 12 to 18 months.
India and the US are making progress in trade negotiations, with a deal expected to be finalized soon. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says both sides are aiming to conclude talks ahead of the July deadline.
Washington is seeking greater market access for American firms, increased purchases of defense equipment, and lower tariffs, especially for agricultural products. In return, the US may ease access for Indian goods, backed by strong relations between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India's chief negotiator for talks with the US also confirmed last week that trade talks between the two countries were progressing well. A team from India had visited Washington in April, followed by Trade Minister Piyush Goyal's trip last month. A US trade delegation is scheduled to visit New Delhi next on June 5th and 6th for further discussions.
Vote counting is underway in South Korea in a snap election triggered by former President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. Voter turnout was at a high of more than 77% as of 7 p.m. local time, according to the South Korean Election Commission. Around 44.4 million people are eligible to vote nationwide. The election has been heavily influenced by the fallout of Yoon's brief attempt to impose martial law last December, which sparked divisive protests and months of political chaos. Opposition leader Lee Jae-myung is currently the frontrunner, followed by the ruling party's Kim Moon-soo, a former member of Yoon's cabinet. The next president faces a polarized country, rising concerns over U.S. tariffs, and an unpredictable ally in President Donald Trump. Among the top priorities would be high-stakes trade talks with the U.S., which have been on hold until the end of the election. Just last night, the government held an emergency meeting with South Korean steelmakers after Trump announced he would double steel tariffs to 50%, set to take effect tomorrow. Over in Vietnam, the Agriculture Ministry says local firms will sign memorandums of understandings with U.S. partners to purchase $2 billion worth of American farm products. This is part of their ongoing efforts to secure a new trade deal between the two countries.
The new deals, signed during a U.S. visit by a delegation of 50 Vietnamese companies led by Agriculture Minister Do Duc Duy. Among them are 5 MOUs for $800 million in purchases over 3 years from Iowa, including corn, wheat, dried distillers' grains, and soybean meal. The move comes as Vietnam tries to ease trade tensions after being slapped with a 46% tariff by the Trump administration, currently paused until July. Both sides are now in negotiations, with Vietnam pledging to increase U.S. imports to help narrow the trade gap. The U.S. recorded a $123 billion trade deficit with Vietnam last year. Last year, Vietnam imported $3.4 billion worth of U.S. farm produce and exported $13.68 billion of its own to the U.S., according to Vietnam News Agency. Vietnam has also committed to buying other U.S. goods such as Boeing aircraft and liquefied natural gas. Other than that, it has also promised to curb counterfeit goods and digital piracy after U.S. accused the country of being a major hub for these illegal activities.
Britain's Trade Minister Jonathan Reynolds will meet U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer in Paris today. The meeting aims to discuss the implementation of a trade deal now complicated by the new U.S. steel tariffs announced last week. Reynolds is in the midst of a 3-day visit to Paris and later Brussels this week. During his visit, he is set to review agreed deals with his counterparts from the US and the EU, who are Britain's two biggest trading partners. The deals struck last month are political understandings rather than formal agreements, with implementation details still unclear. Although Prime Minister Keir Starmer and US President Donald Trump agreed to lower tariffs on British cars and steels to the US, but delayed implementation meant that tariffs may rise before any reductions take effect. Trump announced last week that US tariffs on imported steel would increase from 25% to 50% starting Wednesday. UK Steel warned the move could severely impact British producers. Intensifying global trade tensions are hitting labour markets worldwide, according to International Labour Organization's ILO chief Gilbert F. Hongbo. Speaking at the opening of the 113th International Labour Conference, Hongbo says global job projections for 2025 have been cut by 7 million, down to 53 million, as a result of slower economic growth amid rising trade tensions. He was citing the findings from the ILO's latest World Employment and Social Outlook report. The report highlighted that 84 million jobs across 71 countries are directly or indirectly tied to the U.S. consumer demand and thus vulnerable to the impact of U.S. tariffs. Nearly 56 million of these at-risk roles are in the Asia-Pacific region, with more than 13 million spanning Canada and Mexico. Hongbo also underscored the growing disruption caused by artificial intelligence, warning that highly digitalized sectors such as media, software and finance face increasing risks, while jobs involving repetitive manual work are also becoming more vulnerable. The annual conference runs until June 13th, bringing together delegates from the ILO's 187 member states. Poland's new president-elect Karol Nawrocki is definitely pro-Trump. This is the observation made by an analyst after the nationalist candidate won Sunday's presidential runoff.
Policy Director at the Bathory Foundation, Krzysztof Izebski, said Nawrocki would be definitely more into the MAGA direction than both his liberal rival, Rafał Trzaskowski, and conservative incumbent Andrzej Duda. The new president is said to be more radical than Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and next to Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban on EU issues.
Definitely Trump will have more to say in the Polish politics. The camp, the Law and Justice, the political camp of Karol Nawrocki will be also cooperating much more with Trump, saying that in 2 years they will take over the power. So I think it's a good empowering of the whole MAGA project in the Central and Eastern Europe as well. First, we are in this political campaign to the parliamentary elections in 2027. I think Nawrocki will block everything that Tusk is offering. He will not make life of Tusk any easier because he has to give more credibility to the Law and Justice political camp.
The result is a victory for European conservatives inspired by US President Trump. Nawrocki secured 50.89% of the vote, Election Commission data showed, an outcome that presages more political gridlock as he is likely to use his presidential veto to thwart Prime Minister Donald Tusk's liberal policy agenda.
Harvard University has asked a federal judge to issue a summary judgment to unfreeze the $2.5 billion funding blocked by the federal government. In a court filing, Harvard has accused the administration of violating its constitutional right to free speech and breaching the U.S. federal law. Filed at the U.S. District Court in Boston, Harvard said it received 957 orders since April 14th to freeze funding for research pertaining to national security threats, cancer, and infectious diseases. The university claimed the funding block was driven by its refusal to comply with a set of undisclosed demands from the White House. Harvard has also sued the Trump administration in April, calling the move politically motivated and legally baseless. U.S. President Donald Trump has been targeting elite universities like Harvard for promoting woke ideology and fostering anti-Semitism. His administration has launched multiple investigations into Harvard, including looking into alleged threats against Jewish students following pro-Palestinian protests. Last month, the administration also revoked Harvard's ability to enroll international students, a move temporarily blocked by a judge in a separate lawsuit. That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. That is all for now. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you and good night.